Stepping out of the yellow cab into the biting chill of a howling Chicago blizzard, I pulled the thick collar of my wool coat tight against the freezing wind, my heavy winter boots crunching against the fresh snow covering the grand driveway of my grandfather's suburban estate. Before I could even knock on the massive carved oak doors, 82-year-old Arthur Vance opened them wide, his sharp, piercing eyes taking in my snow-covered coat with immediate, loving concern. "Why on earth did you arrive in a cab, Maya?" Grandpa Arthur asked, his rich baritone voice echoing warmly through the grand foyer as the comforting scent of roasted turkey and cedar wood washed over me. "What happened to the brand new Audi we gave you for your 32nd birthday 2 short months ago?" Before I could shake the frozen slush from my boots, my mother, Eleanor, glided smoothly into the foyer from the living room, holding a crystal wine glass with a smug, satisfied smile that instantly chilled the atmosphere more than the fierce storm outside. "That Audi belongs to her younger sister now, Arthur," Eleanor announced with an air of unearned, absolute authority, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her vintage red wine. An uncomfortable, suffocating silence immediately descended upon the magnificent entryway. A heavy, icy silence that caused the temperature in the room to drop 10 degrees in a single second. Grandpa Arthur's posture turned stone rigid, his sharp eyes narrowing dangerously as he slowly turned toward his corporate estate attorney, Robert Harrison, who stood silently beside the roaring fireplace. Before the heavy silence could dissipate, my 29-year-old sister, Serena, strutted arrogantly into the foyer, linking her arm tightly through that of her 31-year-old husband, Julian Cross. Dressed in an impeccably tailored designer gown that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, Serena rolled her eyes in my direction with practiced, aristocratic disdain. "Maya is just a low-level commercial real estate appraiser," Serena scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension as her diamond tennis bracelet caught the bright chandelier light. "She spends her entire life walking around dusty construction sites and abandoned retail warehouses in heavy work boots. She has absolutely no need for a top-tier luxury German sedan." Julian just received a major promotion to a senior loan officer position at the regional bank, and we need to project a certain level of elite status when entertaining wealthy investors. Julian puffed out his chest, adjusting the silk lapels of his custom suit before flashing a practiced, artificial smile that he routinely used to disarm bank managers and naive clients. "Serena is entirely correct, Maya," Julian added smoothly, his tone dripping with patronizing, insincere patience as he looked down at my frozen figure. "In my line of work, optics are everything. When I pulled up to the country club golf course in that Audi yesterday, it instantly commanded respect from high-net-worth clients. You should actually be thanking me for taking a rapidly depreciating asset off your hands and putting it to work for our family's collective financial legacy." Serena is entirely correct, Maya. "It is simply basic corporate economics, my dear sister." Standing on the melting snow on the marble floor, the sheer audacity of their entitlement was staggering. Yet I kept my face entirely impassive, locking away the sudden surge of adrenaline pumping through my veins. "You didn't just borrow my car from my apartment garage," I said, my voice eerily level. completely devoid of any emotional weakness they could weaponize against me. You entered a secured building and drove it away. So, tell me, Mother, how exactly did you get past 2 locked security doors? Eleanor let out an exasperated, melodramatic sigh, clearly irritated that I was demanding the logistical details of her crime. I went to your apartment building yesterday while you were at work, Eleanor stated casually, swirling the red wine in her crystal glass. I told the concierge there was a dire family emergency, and once he let me up to your floor, I simply used the spare emergency key you gave me 3 years ago, the one you explicitly told me to use if you were injured. Julian chuckled condescendingly, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket to pull out a folded legal document, waving it between his manicured fingers like a winning lottery ticket. We didn't just take the car, Maya. We executed a legally binding asset transfer, Julian boasted with supreme confidence. You signed a comprehensive general power of attorney granting your mother full financial authority when you were hospitalized for appendicitis last year. We took this document to the DMV yesterday, and Eleanor signed the title transfer acting as your proxy. It was completely seamless. I stared at the folded paper in Julian's hand as the vivid memory of last November flashed through my mind with crystal clarity. Rushed to the emergency room with a ruptured appendix, heavily medicated and waiting for emergency surgery, my mother had shoved a clipboard into my trembling hands, claiming it was standard hospital authorization for insurance claims. In my vulnerable, drug-addled state, I had signed it. You used the power of attorney from my appendectomy surgery? I stated slowly, ensuring every single word carried clearly across the silent foyer so that Attorney Harrison could hear every detail. Exactly, Julian replied, flashing a bright, empty smile. You basically handed us the keys yourself and forgot about it. That is what happens when you do not pay attention to legal paperwork you sign. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, meeting his arrogant gaze with an unshakable, icy calm. I didn't forget, Julian, I replied smoothly into the quiet room. But it seems you forgot to check Cook County Public Records before presenting that document to a state government agency. The very day I was discharged from the hospital, my first stop was a notary public to execute a formal, legally binding revocation of power of attorney. I filed that revocation with the county clerk, meaning that paper in your hand has been legally void for over a year. You presented a nullified document to the DMV, forged my signature on a vehicle title, and used your banking credentials to push through a fraudulent transaction. To understand why I remained so remarkably calm amidst their betrayal, you must understand the woman I had forced myself to become over 32 years of quiet survival. Growing up in a wealthy suburban home where my father, Richard, was obsessed with country club status, and my mother valued aesthetic perfection over maternal love, I had quickly learned that favoritism was the fundamental law of our household. While my parents paid Serena's credit cards, covered her luxury rent, and celebrated her mediocrity as if she had won a Nobel Prize, I threw myself into academics and earned my license as a commercial real estate appraiser, a grueling profession requiring thousands of hours of field training and rigorous financial analysis. My mother merely scoffed at my career, asking why I wanted to spend my youth walking through dusty construction sites, while pouring endless praise into Serena's superficial life. The only person who saw through their shallow world was my grandfather, Arthur Vance, an 82-year-old self-made logistics billionaire who despised flashy displays of wealth and respected grit, integrity, and hard work above all else. When Grandpa Arthur surprised me with the Audi for my birthday to honor my professional success, my mother was consumed by bitter resentment that I had received something valuable without Serena's approval. Standing in the foyer, I realized they had mistaken my lifelong avoidance of family drama for weakness, entirely unaware that the analytical appraiser who hunted down financial fraud for a living had just set a trap they could never escape. The adrenaline from the Thanksgiving confrontation at Grandpa Arthur's estate had long evaporated by the time dawn breached the Chicago skyline, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity in my mind. Sitting at my dual-monitor terminal in my apartment, I bypassed standard consumer credit checks and logged directly into the institutional portals I routinely used to vet commercial property owners. In the world of commercial real estate appraisal, data was my primary weapon, and I was fully determined to uncover every financial footprint Julian had left behind. Opening my comprehensive enterprise credit file, I fully expected to find a simple registration shift, or perhaps a modest personal auto loan leveraged against the stolen Audi. Instead, sitting on page 3 like a glowing, radioactive beacon was a newly opened commercial line of credit originated on the exact afternoon my mother had broken into my apartment. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes locked onto the staggering principal loan amount: $500,000. $500,000 had been fraudulently borrowed against my pristine credit score, my professional appraisal license, and my personal identity, without my knowledge or consent. Cross-referencing the loan origination details, my pulse quickened as I realized the issuing lender was the exact regional bank branch where Julian worked as a loan officer. He had not merely stolen a luxury automobile. He had committed a massive federal bank fraud by abusing his insider credentials to push through an unapproved loan to fund his hidden life of crime. Leaning closer to the glowing screen, my fingers flew across the keyboard as I switched over to the Illinois Secretary of State's corporate registry database to identify the receiving entity. Plugging in the routing numbers and corporate tax identification codes listed on the credit report, it took less than 3 minutes to unravel the deceitful facade. The $500,000 had been wired directly into an account belonging to a newly formed entity called Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC. Pulling the official articles of organization for the shell company, my eyes widened in utter disbelief as I read the name of the registered agent and sole managing member: Serena Vance. My golden child sister, who had never worked a rigorous day in her life, was suddenly listed as the chief executive officer of a fraudulent corporation holding $500,000 in stolen capital. The sinister architecture of their scheme fell into place with terrifying precision. The stolen Audi was never about giving Serena a safe commuter car or allowing Julian to impress clients on the golf course. The luxury sedan served as the high-value liquid asset needed to anchor the initial loan application. Julian had bypassed standard underwriting algorithms by attaching my spotless commercial appraisal credentials to the application, burying red flags under a mountain of falsified signatures derived from that revoked power of attorney. leaving me solely liable for a catastrophic debt that threatened my freedom, my reputation, and my entire professional career in this city. Deepening my investigation into the state and federal civil litigation dockets, I typed Julian's full legal name into the search bar, filtering for active judgments, tax liens, and active lawsuits across multiple state jurisdictions. The system buffered briefly before returning a cascade of public records that exposed a catastrophic story of financial ruin beneath his polished exterior. There were 3 active civil judgments against Julian from out-of-state casinos, totaling over $200,000 in unpaid gambling markers. A high-stakes gambling addiction had been quietly eating away at his life, destroying the artificial illusion of prosperity he worked so hard to project before my parents and their country club peers. Furthermore, county property records revealed that the luxury downtown loft he and Serena rented was currently under active eviction proceedings for 4 months of unpaid rent. Reaching out to a senior corporate underwriter at Julian's bank, whom I had known professionally for years, I requested a discreet verification of his current employment status for an upcoming commercial project. Her response came back within minutes, delivering the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Julian had not been promoted to a senior position at all. He was currently on unpaid administrative leave, pending an internal audit of his fraudulent loan portfolio. He was completely stripped of all banking authority, facing imminent termination, public disgrace, and potential criminal prosecution from his own employer for systemic embezzlement, bank fraud, and felony document forgery in this state. Sitting in the quiet morning light, the sheer, staggering scope of their desperation became crystal clear to my analytical mind. Every single luxury my family boasted about, the designer clothes, the first-class tropical vacations, and the $20,000 handbag Serena flaunted at family dinners, was a hollow, pathetic lie built upon borrowed time, fraud, and stolen money. Serena's entire fragile identity was wrapped in being the family's idolized golden child, requiring a relentless stream of unearned wealth to sustain her superiority complex before our relatives. Terrified of losing his trophy wife and losing face before my parents, Julian had tried to buy an elite lifestyle with money he did not possess, turning to high-stakes casino tables when his mid-level salary failed to cover her astronomical spending habits. As his gambling losses mounted and collection agencies began calling, panic had set in, forcing them to seek an immediate, untraceable injection of liquid capital to pay off bookies, halt their eviction, and maintain their flawless facade a little longer. My stolen Audi was the bait, and my immaculate commercial appraisal record was the engine used to drive their $500,000 lifeline through the bank. They had used my life's hard work as a human shield to protect their lies, fully confident that family loyalty and my father's obsession with avoiding public scandal would keep me quiet while I absorbed the devastating financial blow for them without fighting back against their cruelty or demanding justice. Where another person might have dissolved into helpless panic or hysterical tears, my professional training as a commercial real estate appraiser anchored me in absolute ice-cold composure. Throughout my career, my job revolved around forensic analysis, uncovering hidden liabilities, calculating structural risks, and dismantling fraudulent valuations. Looking at the evidence spread across my dual monitors, I realized my family had mistaken my lifelong avoidance of their toxic drama for weakness, entirely unaware that they had just handed me every single tool required to dismantle their lives forever. Methodically, I printed every single document: the credit inquiry logs, the fraudulent loan origination forms featuring my forged proxy signature, the articles of organization for Apex Horizon Holdings, the casino judgments, the eviction notices, and the text message confirming Julian's suspension. Arranging the crisp pages into a neat, chronological stack, I placed them inside a thick manila folder and slid it securely into my leather briefcase. I was no longer a grieving, compliant daughter or an aggrieved sister seeking validation from people incapable of love. I was a skilled investigator holding the blueprint to a collapsing financial crime scene. Zipping my briefcase closed, I picked up my phone and dialed attorney Robert Harrison, ready to initiate the legal avalanche that would forever liberate my life from their predatory, toxic grasp and restore my peace of mind, standing tall in my truth and self-respect. Driving through the snow-dusted streets of the affluent northern suburbs, I pulled my sedan into the pristine, brick-paved driveway of my parents' sprawling Tudor-style estate. Unlocking the heavy mahogany front door with my old brass key, I stepped into the foyer, where the scent of vanilla candles and gourmet espresso hung heavy in the air. I found my parents in the sunlit breakfast nook, my father, Richard, casually skimming the financial section of the newspaper, while my mother, Eleanor, scrolled through a luxury furniture catalog on her tablet. They looked up as my boots clicked softly against the hardwood, immediate irritation flashing across their faces. "I thought we made it clear that your hysterical tantrum at Arthur's house was not to be brought here, Maya," my father stated coldly, without folding his newspaper. Without uttering a word, I unzipped my leather briefcase, pulled out the thick manila folder, and dropped it dead center onto the marble island, the heavy thud making my mother flinch. Opening the binder, I spread the documents out. The commercial credit report showing the $500,000 fraudulent line, the articles of organization for Apex Horizon Holdings listing Serena as managing member, the 3 casino judgments totaling $200,000 for unpaid gambling markers, the active eviction notice for their loft, and the text message confirming Julian's immediate suspension from the bank pending an internal audit. Julian is not a high-powered finance executive, I stated calmly. He is an addicted gambler facing federal prosecution, and he stole my identity to save himself. I waited for the shock, the moral horror, or the protective paternal instinct to kick in, expecting my parents to finally realize that the man they had idolized was a desperate criminal who had endangered their eldest daughter. Instead, my father's face contorted into an ugly, mottled shade of crimson, his jaw clenching so tightly that the muscles jumped beneath his weathered skin. He didn't even glance at the court documents or the bank fraud evidence spread across the marble counter. He glared directly into my eyes with pure, unadulterated rage. How dare you hack into your sister's private financial records and spy on her husband? Richard hissed, his voice vibrating with aggressive authority. Have you completely lost your mind? The sheer, terrifying disconnect from reality took my breath away. He was not angry that Julian had committed a federal felony, forged my signature, or stolen $500,000. He was furious that I had exposed the ugly truth hiding behind their pristine social curtain. You will not say a single word about this to anyone, Maya, my father roared, slamming his hand onto the island so hard his coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Do you have any idea what a federal investigation would do to my business network or our standing at the country club if the authorities raided Serena's apartment? I will call the bank president on Monday. We play golf together. I will personally guarantee the loan, settle the casino debts, and restructure everything quietly. No police, no scandal, and no prison. My mother stood up from her velvet stool, her elegant face twisted into a mask of venomous disgust as she pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. You are a bitter, vengeful monster, Maya, Eleanor spat, her voice dripping with calculated malice that cut deeper than any sharp blade. You could never stand seeing Serena happy, or watching her marry a handsome, successful man while you sit alone in your empty apartment. They hit a temporary rough patch in the market. That is all. Julian simply used family credit resources to secure a short-term bridge loan, and families support one another in times of need. He committed federal bank fraud and wire fraud in my name, Mother, I countered, finally allowing a flicker of my suppressed pain to surface. Eleanor leaned over the counter, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as she dropped her tone to a chilling whisper. It is just paperwork. And if you dare go to the authorities, I will personally ensure your complete professional destruction. I play tennis with the wives of the managing partners at your appraisal firm. I will tell them you suffered a complete psychotic break and that you manufacture elaborate financial delusions to sabotage your sister. I will call the state licensing board and file complaints for unethical behavior, dragging your name through the mud until no commercial firm in Chicago will hire you. You will be socially exiled, professionally blacklisted, and permanently erased from the family trust forever. Standing before the two people who had brought me into this world, an icy, profound dread washed over my soul as I finally saw them without the protective fog of childhood idealization. They were entirely willing to sacrifice my career, my legal safety, my physical health, and my sanity to protect a criminal parasite, simply because prosecuting him would cause a minor social scandal at their golf club. They were ready to pay off $500,000 in gambling debts for a thief, while refusing to contribute a single dollar toward my college education years ago. My father pulled a silver pen from his jacket pocket and slid a blank legal pad across the marble surface toward me. You have precisely 24 hours to formally drop any inquiry into Julian's employment status and sign a binding non-disclosure agreement regarding this entire situation, Richard dictated, his voice cold and transactional. In return, I will pay down the principal over 10 years, and you will retain your credit score, your job, and your place in this family. Refuse, and you walk out that door with nothing, and your mother will execute every threat she just made." I looked at the blank pad, then at my parents, standing shoulder to shoulder in complete moral bankruptcy. "I don't need 24 hours, I replied, my voice smooth, quiet, and steady as bedrock. "I am not signing your cover-up, and I am not taking part in federal fraud. Do whatever you want, but when the FBI comes knocking on your door, do not call me." I turned my back on their sharp shouts of outrage, clutching my leather briefcase tightly as I walked out the heavy front door into the freezing Chicago morning. The biting winter air struck my face like a physical slap, snapping me back to reality as my boots crunched down the snow-covered driveway toward the street. Pulling my smartphone from my coat pocket, my mind raced through the immediate legal protocols required to report the identity theft to the state's attorney general and the FBI before my parents could manipulate the narrative. I was just tapping the contact number for the Financial Crimes Division when the screen abruptly shifted to an incoming call from Thomas, my grandfather's longtime estate manager. Answering on the first ring, the frantic, unnatural tremor in Thomas's voice instantly caused the blood to freeze in my veins. "Miss Maya, you need to get to Chicago Memorial Hospital right now," Thomas pleaded, his voice breaking with uncharacteristic panic. "Mr. Vance collapsed in his study just 20 minutes ago. The paramedics are saying it is a massive cardiac event, and he is completely unresponsive." The sheer, overwhelming wave of terror completely eclipsed the rage I had felt moments prior. Grandpa Arthur was my anchor, the only person in my family who had ever looked at me with genuine pride and unconditional love. Hailing a passing yellow taxi, I shouted the hospital destination to the driver, dropping my phone into my lap as tears finally welled in my eyes, praying desperately that my world was not about to collapse. Bursting through the sterile glass doors of Chicago Memorial Hospital, the overwhelming stench of antiseptic and the chaotic rhythm of beeping monitors assaulted my senses. I found Thomas pacing near the intensive care wing, his face ash gray, informing me through trembling lips that my grandfather remained unresponsive inside the quiet ICU suite. Sinking into a plastic waiting room chair with my face buried in my hands, I spent 20 agonizing minutes praying for a miracle, transformed into nothing more than a terrified granddaughter, fearing the end of her world. The elevator doors abruptly slid open, and my parents marched into the corridor, flanked closely by Serena and Julian. The shift in atmosphere was instantaneous and jarring. They did not arrive with the chaotic, heartbroken panic of a family fearing for a beloved elder, but with the cold, calculated energy of board members arriving at a hostile corporate takeover. Serena immediately burst into loud, theatrical sobs the moment she spotted a triage nurse, clutching her stomach and wailing about how the emotional stress was harming her unborn child, instantly securing VIP treatment and a private suite. My father spotted me sitting alone and crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing my arm tightly through my winter coat and pulling me into a secluded corner by the vending machines. "If you say a single word to the police today about Julian or the loan," my father hissed, his hot breath pressing against my face, The shock of a federal investigation will kill your grandfather, and his blood will be on your hands. I yanked my arm violently from his grip, utterly disgusted by their willingness to weaponize my grandfather's medical crisis as a human shield to freeze my legal retaliation. Looking past my father, I noticed my mother had bypassed the waiting room entirely, cornering the lead cardiologist and a hospital social worker near the busy nurses' station. Moving quietly behind a structural pillar to obscure myself from their view, I listened as Eleanor executed a cold, tactical strike against my grandfather's legacy. "You must understand, Dr. Aries," my mother wept, her voice quivering with a sickly, perfectly manufactured sorrow as she dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. "My father is a proud man who has been hiding his severe cognitive decline from the world for over a year, and we have been trying to protect his dignity. He suffers from advanced, undocumented dementia, making erratic financial decisions and paranoid accusations against us." The weary cardiologist adjusted his glasses, noting that applying a retroactive dementia diagnosis without prior medical history post-trauma was highly irregular. But my father stepped forward, towering over the physician with aggressive country club authority. "We are his immediate family, doctor, and we see the daily reality of his mental collapse," Richard insisted firmly. "This cardiac event is a direct manifestation of his deteriorating brain, and we cannot allow him to make medical or financial decisions in this compromised state. We need you to sign the incapacity paperwork immediately for his own safety and medical protection in this hospital." "We need you to sign the incapacity paperwork immediately for his own safety and medical protection in this hospital." Interjecting smoothly into the conversation, Julian stepped forward, running a hand through his hair to project the image of a deeply concerned grandson-in-law managing a family emergency. "Given his massive holdings, our legal team is filing an immediate ex parte petition for an emergency conservatorship," Julian explained, with chilling efficiency. "We need you to sign an affidavit of temporary medical incapacity so we can assume total control of his $50 million estate by tomorrow morning." Standing in the shadows, the sinister architecture of their true motive was laid completely bare to my analytical mind. Julian did not care about long-term medical care. He was terrified of the impending Monday morning deadline from his bank auditors and the bookies breathing down his neck. If my grandfather died or remained incapacitated, his estate would enter probate and lock away his liquid cash behind months of court red tape, guaranteeing Julian's imprisonment. But if they secured an emergency conservatorship by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eleanor could immediately authorize a wire transfer from Arthur's liquid savings to zero out the $500,000 fraudulent line at the bank, wipe the digital footprint clean, and pay off his casino markers before anyone noticed. They were actively conspiring to commit elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, and grand theft, all while masquerading in the hospital corridor as heartbroken, devoted caretakers. Step by step, they were weaving an inescapable legal trap around themselves, entirely unaware that every single word was being secretly documented for federal justice in this room right now. Stepping out from behind the structural pillar, I walked directly into the center of their circle, my voice echoing firmly down the quiet corridor as I declared that my grandfather was entirely lucid and that any claim of dementia was a malicious fabrication. My family whipped around, their faces hardening into identical masks of hostility. But before Eleanor could complete her sharp insult, the heavy double doors of the intensive care suite swung open. Standing tall in the threshold, completely devoid of any medical tubing, oxygen masks, or hospital gowns, was my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He did not look like a frail elder suffering from a cardiac event. He stood with the immaculate, towering posture of a titan holding court in his boardroom, his sharp eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute authority. Beside him stood his attorney, Robert Harrison, alongside two stoic men in dark business suits, bearing the polished gold badges of the United States Marshals Service. The room froze in collective paralysis as the stunning truth shattered my parents' reality into dust. The sudden collapse in his study, the rushing ambulance, and the emergency ICU admission were not a tragic medical crisis, but a brilliant, highly classified sting operation engineered by Grandpa Arthur, Attorney Harrison, and federal law enforcement. My grandfather had given them the ultimate rope, letting them walk into a hospital and attempt to bribe medical staff to execute a fraudulent conservatorship in front of federal witnesses without realizing their own imminent, tragic, and irreversible doom. Stepping forward, Attorney Robert Harrison opened his heavy leather briefcase, pulling out a thick sheath of legal documents bearing the official seal of the United States District Court. There is a crucial legal reality you failed to investigate, Julian, Harrison stated, his voice a razor-sharp blade cutting through the silent corridor. When Mr. Vance purchased the Audi for Maya, it was not a simple retail dealership transaction. It was registered as the inaugural asset of the Maya Vance Irrevocable Federal Trust. Julian's face drained of all color as the lawyer continued. The trust operates under a specific federal firewall designed to protect generational wealth. When you presented a nullified power of attorney to the DMV and submitted those forged documents to your bank's underwriting portal, you did not merely commit state-level auto theft. You misappropriated an asset held within a federally protected entity, triggering automatic compliance alerts within the United States Treasury Department. The magnitude of their fatal mistake expanded like a massive grid. By wiring those fraudulent funds into Apex Horizon Holdings across state lines using a federal trust asset, Julian had committed Class A federal bank fraud and wire fraud. My parents had actively aligned themselves as co-conspirators in an ongoing federal investigation, signing fraudulent claims under penalty of perjury. As the federal agents noted every word, I looked at my terrified family, realizing that in their blind greed to destroy me, they had walked directly into an inescapable, ironclad cage of their own making. By Saturday afternoon, believing they had successfully secured emergency conservatorship over my grandfather's $50 million estate and neutralized my opposition, Serena and Julian threw an extravagantly opulent baby shower aboard the Majestic, a premier 3-deck charter yacht docked along the sparkling waters of Lake Michigan. They had spared absolutely no expense, inviting the absolute pinnacle of Chicago's elite socialites, prominent commercial real estate developers, and high-ranking banking executives to witness their manufactured social triumph. The main dining salon was transformed into an astonishing winter wonderland, dripping with thousands of imported white orchids, cascading crystal garlands, and sterling silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, Wagyu beef, and vintage champagne. Every single floral arrangement, every custom silk tablecloth, every gourmet appetizer, and the massive charter fee had been brazenly charged to newly opened credit lines secured against my grandfather's hijacked assets mere hours after the judge signed the fraudulent petition. Sitting in the discreet surveillance vehicle parked near the private marina, I watched the live video feeds on federal tactical laptops as uniformed waiters navigated through the growing crowd of wealthy guests. Serena held court on a plush velvet settee in a custom pearl-encrusted maternity gown, triumphantly cradling her stomach while accepting lavish gifts from adoring attendees. My parents stood on the upper deck like proud monarchs surveying a conquered territory, completely intoxicated by the illusion of their newly acquired unlimited wealth, utterly oblivious to the fact that the entire floating spectacle was nothing more than an inescapable gilded trap engineered for their ultimate ruin. Holding court in the center of the main deck, my mother, Eleanor, systematically set fire to my professional reputation among the wives of Chicago's most influential commercial property developers and managing partners. Dabbing her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief, Eleanor whispered a sickly, manufactured tale of deep tragedy, claiming that my absence was due to a complete psychotic break and that I had become dangerously unhinged with bitter jealousy over Serena's impending motherhood. My father, Richard, stepped forward to reinforce the cruel lie, solemnly declaring before his country club peers that they were forced to sever all ties and secure their accounts for the physical safety of their unborn grandchild. Meanwhile, Julian prowled the dining salon with a glass of sparkling cider, slapping the backs of wealthy investors and projecting the aura of a disciplined, successful financial titan. Tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon to command complete silence, Julian stepped into the focal point of the room, flanked by my beaming parents and a radiant Serena. Raising his champagne glass high, Julian delivered a grandiose victory speech, thanking my father for his vision and officially announcing that effective Monday morning, he would be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer of the newly consolidated Vance Family Investment Fund. The elite crowd raised their glasses in a unified salute, cheering enthusiastically as my father proudly clapped Julian on the back, celebrating what they falsely believed to be the absolute, untouchable zenith of their stolen glory in this city. At that precise moment of their supreme arrogance, the heavy brass handles of the double glass doors swung inward with a loud metallic clatter that instantly shattered the pristine atmosphere of the room. Stepping over the threshold into the blinding warmth of the salon, I walked with a steady, metronomic rhythm, flanked by my grandfather, Arthur Vance, who walked at my side with the towering, unyielding vitality of a titan resurrected from the grave. Directly behind us moved a disciplined tactical team of armed United States Marshals, their dark tactical vests and gleaming gold badges standing in stark, violent contrast to the delicate white orchids and crystal garlands decorating the room. Seeing me standing there, perfectly composed, impeccably dressed, and accompanied by my healthy, formidable grandfather, completely scrambled their manufactured reality. Someone bumped into a waiter, sending a silver tray of champagne glasses crashing to the teak deck with a thunderous shatter that echoed like a gunshot throughout the silent salon. The ambient music died instantly, and the entire room froze in a collective state of paralysis as high society guests gasped in absolute shock. Julian stopped mid-toast, his arm remaining suspended in the air as his face drained of all color, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. My mother dropped her glass entirely, the vintage champagne pooling around her designer heels as her jaw went slack, while my father physically stumbled backward into a high-top table, staring at Arthur as though looking at a literal ghost from the dark past. Before anyone in my family could utter a word of protest, the lead United States Marshal stepped firmly into Julian's personal space, his authoritative voice echoing through the silent salon as he declared him under formal federal arrest. Attorney Robert Harrison stepped forward, opening his heavy leather briefcase to present a formal indictment issued by the United States District Court, reading the charges aloud so every elite guest heard the unvarnished truth about his systemic crimes. Julian was being detained pursuant to a federal indictment, including 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of bank fraud, and felony forgery involving an irrevocable federal trust. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Harrison detailed how Julian had utilized a nullified power of attorney to steal my identity, forge a title transfer, and launder $500,000 through a shell corporation across state lines. 2 junior marshals moved swiftly, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around Julian's wrists as his arrogant demeanor completely collapsed into pathetic, wide-eyed terror. My parents shrieked in outrage, attempting to assert their country club status, but Harrison coldly informed them they were being detained for immediate federal questioning regarding perjury and conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. My mother wept hysterically as officers guided her toward the boarding ramp, while my father stood broken and speechless, unable to meet the disgusted gazes of his golf partners and business associates, watching his social standing evaporate entirely within 3 short minutes in full public view. As the marshals led my parents and Julian away, a sharp, piercing scream shattered the remaining quiet as Serena lunged frantically toward me across the polished teak floor, her hands curled into claws. Stepping smoothly to the side, I watched her skid on the spilled champagne and fall heavily to her knees among the broken glass, immediately clutching her stomach and wailing that I was trying to murder her unborn child. Reaching into my blazer pocket, I pulled out a sealed legal folder and tossed a stack of high-resolution documents onto the deck before her. "You can stop the theatrical performance, Serena," I stated, my voice cutting through her manufactured sobs with icy precision. "There is no baby." I dropped the receipt from a Los Angeles theatrical supply company showing her $4,000 purchase of a weighted silicone prosthetic belly, followed by an official bank termination notice for Julian. The final document was the most devastating. A signed, illegal surrogacy contract showing she planned to buy a child illegally to cover her elaborate lie. Gasps of horror erupted from the wealthy guests as they realized Serena had faked a pregnancy to emotionally blackmail our parents into risking federal prison. Serena froze, her face draining of all color as she sat among the broken glass, completely cornered, exposed, and ruined. Standing tall, I realized I had not merely protected my grandfather's legacy, I had finally liberated myself from 32 years of toxic deception, reclaiming my life, my freedom, and my unshakable dignity. 1 year after that fateful, ice-cold night along the shimmering shores of Lake Michigan, when federal authorities dismantled my family's fraudulent empire, I stood inside the sunlit, wood-paneled courtroom of the United States District Court to hear the final hammer of justice fall upon our lives. Presiding Judge Evans delivered a stern, unyielding verdict that permanently sealed Julian Cross's fate. 12 full years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole, forcing him to spend the prime years of his life wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit inside a stark cell. Serena's downfall was equally absolute and public. Stripped of Julian's stolen income and permanently cut off from my parents' endless financial bailouts, she was forced to declare total Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The elite wives of commercial developers blacklisted her permanently, expelling her from the high society circles she had once ruled with such cruel, arrogant entitlement. Deprived of her luxury downtown loft, designer wardrobe, and superficial prestige, my sister now worked grueling night shifts as a low-level retail clerk in an expansive suburban shopping mall, completely forgotten by the wealthy world she had compromised her soul to impress. Standing near the gallery doors beside Grandpa Arthur, I watched her shuffle out of the courtroom in heavy, suffocating silence, realizing that the golden child who had spent 32 years walking upon my dignity had finally been forced to confront the harsh, unvarnished reality of her own empty choices, stripped forever of her comfortable, toxic illusions, superficial pride, and unearned privilege that had shielded her from consequence. The total collapse of my parents, Richard and Eleanor, demonstrated the swift, unforgiving efficiency of karma when hypocrisy is stripped bare before the world. Defending themselves against federal criminal charges of conspiracy and elder financial exploitation drained every single dollar they possessed, as massive legal retainer fees combined with court-ordered restitution forced the immediate liquidation of their entire personal fortune. The sprawling Tudor-style estate in the affluent northern suburbs, the very house where I had spent my youth being told I was an unappreciated failure and a disappointment, was foreclosed on and seized by the exact bank Julian had attempted to defraud. expelled from the country club in utter disgrace. Their names became synonymous with criminal fraud across Chicago. Walking down a downtown street months later, I caught sight of two haggard figures stepping out of a discount grocery store into the biting winter wind. Eleanor looked broken and exhausted, her unkempt gray hair showing beneath a faded winter coat, while Richard carried thin plastic bags that threatened to tear under the weight of cheap canned goods. When one of her bags burst on the icy pavement, Eleanor knelt in frustration to retrieve the rolling cans, her eyes catching mine across the busy intersection. In that fleeting second, I saw the crushing weight of public ruin in their eyes, knowing they were completely trapped in the miserable, inescapable reality they had built for themselves through decades of greed, favoritism, and moral bankruptcy in this city, completely abandoned by the wealthy peers they had sacrificed their daughter to impress. Stepping into my new official role as the sole managing director of the $50 million Vance Family Investment Fund, I assumed full stewardship over the generational legacy my grandfather had spent 50 years constructing with his sweat, blood, and tears. Working alongside Grandpa Arthur from our new corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago, I applied every single ounce of my commercial real estate appraisal background to fortify our assets against future vulnerabilities and predatory schemes from any source. Under my direct leadership, the fund completely abandoned the high-risk, ego-driven speculations my father had always favored, reallocating our capital into rock-solid, fully vetted commercial acquisitions that generated steady, sustainable, long-term returns for our philanthropic foundation and commercial partners. We established an environment of absolute transparency, ensuring that every single transaction, every legal deed, and every financial ledger was subjected to rigorous, uncompromised independent audits and complete public accountability. For the first time in my professional life, I was no longer proving my worth to parents who viewed my hard work as a personal bank to be looted. I was operating at the absolute peak of my analytical career, answering only to my grandfather and my own unshakable sense of personal integrity. Managing the multi-million-dollar portfolio with precision, vision, and grace, I found a deep, quiet pride in knowing that the very expertise my mother had once ridiculed as walking through dusty construction sites had become the foundational anchor shielding our family legacy for generations to come, transforming years of buried grief into an unassailable bastion of financial strength and personal sovereignty. Transforming our hard-won legal victory into an enduring beacon of hope, Grandpa Arthur and I allocated a significant portion of our fund's annual profits to officially register a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization named the Vance Legacy Foundation for Financial Protection. Operating directly from a dedicated suite within our corporate office, our foundation brought together elite estate attorneys, forensic accountants, and compassionate social workers to provide free legal counsel, court advocacy, and emergency financial aid to vulnerable individuals facing family betrayal. We focused our core mission on protecting two groups who are most frequently targeted by toxic relatives: elderly citizens suffering from subtle family coercion, and young women whose financial independence is systematically sabotaged by parasitic guardians. Over our first 18 months of operation, our legal team successfully intervened in dozens of high-stakes cases across Illinois, freezing fraudulent accounts, revoking illegal powers of attorney, and helping victims reclaim millions of dollars in stolen generational assets and rightful inheritances. Working closely with survivors who arrived at our doors broken, confused, and fearful, just as I had once felt in my parents' home. I shared my own journey to remind them that standing up to toxic bloodlines is not betrayal, but the highest act of self-respect, courage, and self-preservation. Our foundation proved that out of the ashes of profound, painful family betrayal, a powerful, everlasting sanctuary of healing, justice, and empowerment could rise to protect the innocent from financial exploitation forever, restoring profound dignity, hope, and peace to those innocent souls who had almost lost all faith in humanity and justice. Now, stepping down the wide granite steps of the Dirksen Federal Courthouse under a crisp, brilliant autumn sky, I drew a deep, unobstructed breath of cool air, feeling an unshakable sense of lightness settle over my spirit. Sitting at the curb, polished to a brilliant, flawless shine, was my Audi, legally recovered from the impound lot and securely registered under the irrevocable trust, standing proudly no longer as a mere luxury sedan, but as a gleaming monument to my survival, independence, and resilience. As I reached for the driver's door handle, I glanced across the snowy street and saw Richard and Eleanor shivering at a bus stop, clutching their flimsy plastic grocery bags against the biting winter wind. For 32 years, I had allowed their relentless gaslighting to dictate my self-worth, naively believing that absorbing their cruelty was the only way to keep the peace in our home. But as I looked into their desperate, hollow eyes across the roaring, icy Chicago traffic, I felt no lingering anger, no bitter desire for vengeance, and no pathetic need to hear their insincere, late apologies. I felt only absolute, crystalline peace. Sliding gracefully into the plush leather driver's seat, I started the engine, shifted into gear, and pulled smoothly and confidently into the bustling city traffic, leaving them behind forever in the freezing cold as I drove boldly toward a radiant, unblemished future of unconditional freedom, dignity, and purpose, finally claiming my own independent life, my true purpose, and my unshakable, beautiful legacy.